Well, German officials are still trying to determine the source of that country's deadly E. coli outbreak.
This weekend, they thought they had traced the source to a bean sprout farm near Hamburg. The outbreak has killed 22 people, sickened more than 2,300. But today, officials say new tests show that organic farm is not the source, and the search continues. It's one of the most serious E. coli outbreaks ever recorded.
So what is E. coli and how is it treated? We turn to our doctor on call, Zorba Paster, for some answers. Good to see you again, Dr. Zorba.
A pleasure to be here.
Let's start at the basics. What is E. coli?
Well, E. coli is a bacterium, and it's been around forever, and it's the cause of lots of serious infections. When you think back to a number of infections, years ago there was the Jack-in-the-Box E. coli infection that killed a number of toddlers and small children. And then, of course, we had the E. coli infection a number of years ago, or rather, I think it was last year or a year and a half ago in the U.S. that affected spinach. So this is a common contaminant that occurs in our food supply.
It's common, so how does this affect one's body? What are the symptoms?
Well, the common symptoms for, we'll say, regular E. coli, not the awful E. coli, is diarrhea, cramping. In fact, most travelers' diarrhea, when you travel to another country and you come down with diarrhea, is really an E. coli infection. But it's not what we call the pathogenic E. coli, the bad E. coli. So diarrhea, vomiting can also be that. Sometimes you can have chills and fever. This particular E. coli is a very virulent bug. It produces bloody diarrhea and then can lead to a complication called hemolytic uremic syndrome, which means kidney failure. So it's really either the worst E. coli type infection we've ever seen or certainly up there with that top category.
So that's what's killing people, the kidneys shut down.
Absolutely. And that's actually what happened with the E. coli infection. And it took, if you remember, it took the CDC quite some time before they were finally able to find the contaminant that I believe came from animals. They were either pork and pigs that actually had the E. coli, usually animal sources, that were then contaminating vegetables.
Is this easy to treat?
Well, the bad infection sometimes is very difficult. This particular infection in Germany apparently is resistant to 14 different kinds of antibiotics. The usual treatment for the non-pathogenic, the non-awful E. coli is just to sort of wait it out. But the serious E. coli, if you've got bloody diarrhea, it means going to your physician and finding out exactly what antibiotic to be on. But the bottom line for this is to remember prevention. Wash your hands, wash your vegetables, be very careful with what you're eating. You know, your fresh produce, wash it in the sink and make sure that you're really vigilant on making sure you keep animal sources away from vegetable sources, because when you're washing fresh produce, you don't want to mix it, for instance, with ground beef. You want to make sure you wash your utensils in between one and the other.
That is good advice. Yeah. And with the heat coming up tomorrow, just common advice, stay hydrated, stay cool, that kind of stuff.
That's right. That's exactly right. And when you cook your burgers, because burgers can also have E. coli contaminant, make sure you cook it all the way through and do not eat them raw.
All right. That is good advice. Zorba,
very good.
Stay well. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. A pleasure.